If you've spent any time in the online financial world recently, you might have seen a provocative claim from financial strategist Michael Green. His claim is that the poverty line in the United States of America is not $32,000. It's actually closer to $140,000. At first glance, this sounds absurd. How could a six-figure income be considered poverty? But beneath the headline is a deeper, big-picture argument, one that exposes how we measure poverty, how governments communicate economic realities, and how monetary debasement distorts our understanding of wealth and scarcity. We'll be addressing this shocking claim today on Biblical Bitcoin and assessing the truth behind it and how Scripture helps us interpret economic reality through the lens of honest weights and measures. So to start, the viral article does not claim that people making 140 grand are literally starving. Instead, it critiques how poverty is measured in the United States today. The U.S. poverty line was created in the early 1960s. It was based on a simple formula for a family of four, the cost of a minimum food diet multiplied by 3. Why 3? Because at the time, food made up about 1/3 of household spending. But here's the problem. Today, food is no longer the dominant expense. Housing, healthcare, childcare, education, transportation, insurance now consume the majority of the household income. Yet the poverty line is still anchored to a framework designed for a completely different economic reality. The $140,000 figure comes from asking the question, what if we updated the original logic of the poverty calculation using today's spending patterns? When you do that, accounting for housing costs, healthcare premiums, childcare, taxes, and the loss of single-income household viability, the number rises dramatically. Again, the claim is not that $140,000 is destitution. The claim is that our official metrics radically understate economic stress, similar to how inflation measurements are hedonically adjusted, making people feel crazy for struggling when the government says they're doing just fine. Whether or not you accept the exact number of $140,000, the article forces an uncomfortable realization. Our measurements no longer describe lived reality. Scripture speaks tangentially, if not directly, to this issue. Proverbs 11:1, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. In biblical times, scales and weights were used to measure fairness in economic trade. To manipulate the scale or use differing weights that would favor the merchant was to lie, not just economically, but morally. When the government declares that $32,000 a year is the poverty line, while millions of young people earning far more than that are delaying starting families or buying a house, we are no longer dealing with a neutral statistic. We're dealing with a false balance. Fiat monetary systems depend on measurement manipulation. Inflation is reported in averages that exclude lived necessities. Asset inflation is monumentally ignored, while consumer pricing is selectively tracked, and money supply expansion, or debasement, is hidden through tricky language. The result is a population that feels poorer, not necessarily because they misunderstand economics, but because the measuring stick they're using has been distorted. Let's get back to a core idea within this channel. How should people protect themselves from monetary debasement? Throughout history, whenever a currency is losing purchasing power, people switch from saving in the currency to saving in assets. Assets essentially serve the purpose of storing value over time and being harder to debase than a currency. This is why people historically have saved in land and real estate, livestock, precious metals, businesses, or other stocks. In modern times, we see the same behavior. People buying homes, not as a means of shelter, they might not even live there for a full year, but it's essentially a speculative asset. Stocks become savings vehicles rather than ownership claims, and art, collectibles, watches even become a store of value. This isn't greed, it's defensive behavior. People aren't trying to get rich, they're just trying to keep what they've earned. The tragedy is that asset inflation prices out the young and the poor, while rewarding those closest to the money creation. This is one of the most under-discussed flaws of the fiat money system. So here's where Bitcoin enters the conversation. As we just described, as currencies debase, assets increase in value. Not because those assets are good money, but people just need a way to store value, because assets actually make very imperfect money. Real estate is illiquid and taxed. Stocks carry counterparty risk, and gold is very difficult to verify and transport. Bitcoin is fundamentally different because it's not an asset trying to become money. Bitcoin is money discovering itself in digital form. Bitcoin is essentially perfect money. Perfect scarcity, perfect portability, perfect recognizability, perfect durability, and perfect divisibility. For the first time in generations, individuals can store the fruits of their labor in a way where they don't have to trust politicians, trust institutions, or speculate on an asset. From a biblical perspective, it feels like there's a moral clarity and honesty to the money. All in all, the $140,000 poverty line argument is not about a number. It's about honest weights and measures, and this is why Christians should care. Thank you for joining me this episode of Biblical Bitcoin. Be sure to like and subscribe. God bless.